There's a special kind of audacity required to block someone's driveway with a Porsche, then accuse them of being inconsiderate. But that's exactly what Karen did. At 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, when I was already running late for a site inspection I couldn't afford to miss. Her Porsche Panamera was gleaming, smugly parked across the entire entrance to my driveway like a luxury gatekeeper. I stood there, travel mug in hand, staring at the silver wedge of German arrogance, while Karen, in her lavender tracksuit and oversized sun visor, waved at me from her porch as if she'd just done me a favor. "I didn't want it to get wet from the sprinklers," she called out, smiling sweetly. "Hope you don't mind just going around." There was no around. I lived on a cul-de-sac with one way in and one way out. And my property, unlike hers, didn't have a circular driveway. I was boxed in by concrete and entitlement. Now, most people would call a tow truck. But I've never been most people, and Karen had never met someone who made their living designing commercial construction zones, including operating and coordinating heavy machinery. I calmly waved back, said nothing, and returned to my garage where I quietly opened my laptop and pushed back every appointment I had by 1 hour. Then I placed a single call to my buddy Ron, who runs a salvage and logistics company. We exchanged exactly 11 words. "You still have that portable lift rig?" "Yup. Want it over?" "Now." By 8:30, I was sipping a fresh cup of coffee on my porch, while Karen sat in her rocking chair applying lip gloss like this was a vacation. When the flatbed truck rumbled down the street, she furrowed her brow. The forklift wasn't a Home Depot special. It was a bright yellow Moffett with precision hydraulic arms and a low-clearance lifting plate. Ron and I positioned it slowly, deliberately, while Karen finally stood and tottered down her step. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, suddenly realizing her Porsche might not be quite as immovable as she thought. "I'm moving your car," I said calmly, adjusting my sunglasses. "You're blocking my legal access." "You can't just pick it up," she screamed, hands flailing. "That's destruction of property." "Then maybe don't leave it where it shouldn't be." But we didn't damage a thing. Ron's rig was surgical. We wrapped the tires, eased the forks beneath, and in under 6 minutes, the Porsche was suspended like a trophy stag being carried off a hunt. "Where do you want it?" Ron asked, suppressing a smirk. My eyes drifted across the street to Karen's house, the white stucco McMansion with the kidney-shaped in-ground pool that her kids hadn't used in years. "Over there," I said. "Just lower it gently into the shallow end." Karen screamed like a kettle. "That is private property." "That is private property." Ron glanced at me. "You sure?" "She said I should just go around." "This is around." And with that, the Panamera descended into its aquatic retirement, resting delicately in 3 feet of chlorinated water, like a luxury submarine designed by idiots. Karen stormed up to me, inches from my face, veins popping under her pink foundation. "You'll pay for this. I'm on the HOA board." "I know," I said, sipping my coffee again. "That's why I recorded everything." Her eyes flicked up to my porch camera. Then her face dropped. 3 hours later, I got an email from the HOA, not from Karen, but from its president, a man I'd never met, requesting a civil mediation regarding a neighborhood incident. It was clear Karen had made her move. And she had no idea I was already several moves ahead. Because what she didn't know, yet, was that I had just submitted my own application. Not to join the HOA board. To buy the land under her pool. Because unlike most suburban homeowners, Karen didn't actually own her land. The HOA retained mineral and water rights on the eastern strip. And I just so happened to know the board was delinquent on the taxes. 1 tax lien application and 3 notarized forms later, I was officially the proud owner of her pool's footprint. But that revelation and the chaos that would follow hadn't exploded yet. At this point, Karen still thought I was just some smug neighbor with too much caffeine and a forklift. She didn't realize she was swimming in much deeper water. For now, she was busy posting on Facebook, trying to rally the neighborhood with phrases like domestic terrorism and mechanical assault. Meanwhile, the Porsche sat like a bloated trophy, nose first in the shallow end of her pool, slowly seeping axle fluid into the chlorinated water. Her husband, a meek-looking man named Grant, returned from his corporate finance job later that evening, took one look at the scene, and walked straight into the house without a word. I waved. He didn't wave back. The next morning, I got a knock on the door. A county code enforcement officer stood there looking confused. I got a report of unauthorized vehicle storage in a swimming pool? I led him across the street, said nothing, and just pointed. He stood there in silence for several moments, blinking. "You didn't put it there, right?" he finally asked. "No, sir," I said. "I simply moved a blockade to a more appropriate location on adjacent property. It happens to be my land now." He looked down at his clipboard, then back at the pool. "I have no idea what to even write down here." "Then maybe write, problem resolved." He nodded slowly and walked away. Karen, however, was not done. The next escalation came 2 days later, during what was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I returned from a hike to find a thick yellow warning notice posted on my front door. Notice of violation, citing me for operating industrial equipment on a residential street, signed by the HOA enforcement officer. And not just signed, stamped, with Karen's name in bold at the bottom. I laughed. Then I walked into my garage and opened the file I had kept just for this sort of HOA idiocy. See, I had kept every letter she'd sent since the day I moved in. Every threat, every violation, every ridiculous citation for grass height and tool sheds. I had digital backups, camera footage, voice recordings, even the one where she said, "The rules don't apply to me." I compiled everything, packaged it into a single PDF, and titled it Karen HOA_aggressive abuse _2023.pdf. Then I sent it to the full HOA board. And the local paper. And just for good measure, the zoning office. Karen had no clue she'd finally picked a fight with someone who wasn't going to back down. She wanted war? I'd make it a demolition derby. Only she'd be the only one without a helmet. And next, I was going after her biggest asset. The HOA itself. By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood was divided into 3 camps. Those who supported Karen, those who thought I was a genius, and those who just wanted to keep their heads down and mow their lawns. The Porsche was still in the pool, looking like a very expensive inflatable toy someone forgot to deflate. It was now draped in a blue tarp, as if that would somehow hide the embarrassment. The chlorine had bleached its tires a strange gray, and the smell of mildew was starting to waft across the street every time the breeze kicked up. Karen hadn't spoken a word to me since the forklift event. She didn't need to. Her silence came loaded with threats, her glares practically steaming from behind her tinted kitchen windows. But I didn't retaliate. Not yet. I waited. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's surgical. That Tuesday night, I attended my very first HOA meeting. I hadn't gone before because I usually have a violent allergic reaction to petty power games and 3-hour debates over mailbox colors. But this time, I wore my nicest button-up, brought a clipboard, and showed up 15 minutes early with coffee for the board. That confused everyone, especially Karen, who arrived exactly on time in a pearl-white pantsuit and 3 pounds of foundation. Her face soured the moment she saw me, like someone had just farted in her personal airspace. I greeted her with a calm "Evening, Karen," and took the empty seat directly across from hers. The room was packed. Word had spread. A few neighbors gave me a quiet thumbs up. Others tried to avoid eye contact entirely. At the front sat the HOA president, Carl Jenkins, a man who looked like he was permanently stuck in the 1990s, complete with frosted tips, a Bluetooth headset, and a clipboard covered in highlighter marks. He called the meeting to order and opened with, "Let's keep tonight civil." Spoiler, we didn't. About 20 minutes in, Karen stood up and launched into what I now call the great monologue of persecution. She read from a stack of stapled pages with trembling hands and dramatic pauses, describing how her property had been violated by unlawful machinery, how she had been emotionally traumatized, and how the poolside placement of her Porsche was tantamount to vandalism. I waited for her to drop the line about irreparable emotional distress, and sure enough, there it was, delivered with trembling lips and a glance around the room, as if daring someone to doubt her pain. When she finished, Carl turned to me with the most exhausted expression I've ever seen on a human being. "Would you like to respond?" he asked, probably hoping I'd say no. I stood, calm, measured, no theatrics. I passed printed packets down the table, copies of all her past violation notices against me, timestamps, porch camera screenshots, even the voice memo where she admitted moving her car across my driveway because she didn't want her tires wet. The final page included a printout of the official property diagram, now updated with my name as the new owner of the pool plot. A few gasps circled the table like ripples in a pond. One board member audibly whispered, "Oh my God." "I didn't damage her property," I explained. "I relocated it, with extreme care, onto land I now legally own, thanks to the HOA's delinquent tax filings." I pointed to the document. "And I'd be happy to forgive that back tax amount, if we all agree to dismiss these petty fines and harassment complaints moving forward." Karen's mouth opened. No sound came out. For a moment I thought Carl might laugh. Instead, he rubbed his temples and said, "Okay. We're going to table this for legal review." And then, under his breath, "Jesus Christ." The meeting adjourned shortly after. Karen stormed out first, knocking over a stack of paper cups on the refreshment table. I stayed behind and helped clean up. It was important that people saw that, me being calm, helpful, the reasonable neighbor, because while Karen ran on raw entitlement, I ran on optics. And perception? Perception is everything in an HOA war. The next day, I got the official email. All violation notices dismissed pending further board review. Translation: they were terrified I'd sue. But Karen didn't retreat. She doubled down. The very next morning, I woke to find a construction crew parked in front of my house. A large white truck bearing the logo Evergreen Neighborhood Renovations was idling by the curb. Two guys were already unloading fencing panels and concrete bags. "Morning," I said to the foreman. "Can I help you?" "We're here to install a decorative barrier along the easement," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "Whose easement?" He pointed toward the space between my driveway and Karen's lawn. "That's my property line," I told him. "You sure you've got the right address?" He checked the form again. "This order came from the HOA office." I smiled. "Give me 10 minutes. I walked inside, grabbed my deed documents, and called my lawyer, Hannah. Not only is Hannah razor-sharp and wickedly fast with paperwork, she also hates HOAs with the fire of 1,000 suns. She got on the phone with the foreman, walked him through the parcel IDs, and informed him, gently but firmly, that placing anything on my land without consent would qualify as trespassing and illegal construction. The crew packed up before lunchtime. Karen watched it all unfold from behind her curtains. That evening, she came outside to collect her mail and, accidentally, dropped a gardening stake near my mailbox, then took an eternity picking it up. I didn't say a word. Just watched. That's when I realized she wasn't just mad, she was unraveling. This was a woman used to being feared, obeyed, and tolerated. And now? She was being outplayed at every turn by the quiet guy with the coffee mug and camera footage. But the final twist of the week came from an unexpected source. Carl Jenkins himself knocked on my door Thursday morning. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "Sure," I said, waving him into the living room. He sat stiffly, arms folded, avoiding eye contact. "I wanted to let you know Karen's been temporarily suspended from the HOA board," he said. "Conflict of interest. Abuse of power. Whatever we can pin on her, honestly." I blinked. "That's a surprise." "She's threatening to sue us now," he added. Claims you've been bullying her. Do I seem like a bully to you? I asked. Carl looked around the room, noticed the neatly stacked documents on my bookshelf labeled HOA incidents, and shook his head. No. You seem like someone who plans, which scares people like Karen. He stood, patted his clipboard nervously, and added, just keep doing what you're doing. And maybe don't move any more luxury cars with forklifts. No promises, I said. As he left, I stood by the door and stared across the street. Karen was out by the edge of her lawn, spraying her azaleas like nothing had happened. But her posture was different now, rigid, tense. She didn't wave. She knew something had shifted. She'd lost the initiative. But she hadn't even seen the next card I was about to play. Because in 3 days, I'd be holding a legally sanctioned neighborhood event. On her front lawn. And this time, it wouldn't be me making a scene. It would be everyone else. 3 days later, the lawn in front of Karen's pristine suburban fortress was transformed into something she could only describe as a public humiliation circus. But to everyone else, it was a perfectly legal, HOA-approved neighborhood beautification kickoff, a volunteer event I organized under the clause in the HOA charter that allowed members to host community-improving initiatives on shared property easements. Karen's mistake, and believe me, she had made many, was not realizing that the front 15 feet of her lawn fell under that exact classification. Shared easement. Community maintained. Public domain, with just enough legal ambiguity to let me throw a party on it. I arrived early that morning wearing a flannel shirt and aviators, sipping my usual black coffee. A folding table was already set up on her sidewalk, covered in paint samples, mulch catalogs, and sign-up sheet. I brought in potted flowers, gardening tools, and snacks from the local bakery. The flyer I'd handed out to every house the week before promised lawn games, free coffee, and a community makeover. About 30 neighbors showed up, most of them curious, a few clearly there for the spectacle. Karen? She wasn't just furious, she was stunned. She opened her curtains at 9:12 a.m. and froze, mouth slightly open, dressed in a pastel greenhouse robe and clutching a protein shake like it was a weapon. I waved. She did not wave back. We began edging her lawn first. That alone nearly gave her a stroke. Then we trimmed her hedges, replanted her flower bed, the one that was mostly weeds, and, my favorite part, dug a little dry creek with decorative stones right along her walkway. It looked fantastic. Even the HOA president, Carl, showed up and planted a few succulents, clearly trying to keep his head down while subtly signaling, "Please don't sue me." Karen finally burst out of the house around 10:30, screeching like a teakettle left on high heat. "This is private property. You can't just, this is trespassing," she shouted, arms flailing like a broken windmill. I smiled calmly. "Hey Karen, it's all good. Section 4.3b of the HOA Charter, Community Improvements to Shared Easements, remember?" She stormed down the front steps, still in slippers, and shoved her face into Carl's. "Stop this right now or I'll have the police here in 10 minutes. Carl looked up from his succulent. "Karen, you signed off on that easement years ago. You've got 15 feet of buffer zone. That's what this is. We're following the rules." Karen turned on me. "You're doing this to harass me." "Karen," I said evenly, "I'm doing this for the community. Your lawn just happens to be where the community begins." She stomped back inside without another word. But we could all see her pacing behind the windows, fuming. Several neighbors gave me quiet nods of approval. One even offered me a mimosa from her thermos, which I declined, barely. By noon, Karen had enough. She called the cops. 2 cruisers showed up 20 minutes later, their arrival causing a minor ripple in the now growing crowd. I approached them before Karen could. Officer Ramirez and his partner, a tall guy with a clipboard, listened patiently as I explained the situation. Then I handed them laminated copies of the HOA charter, the plat map showing the easement, and the signed community permit I'd filed the day before. By the time Karen waddled over waving her phone, her voice climbing octaves, The officers had already seen enough. "Ma'am, everything they're doing appears to be compliant with your HOA's guidelines," Ramirez said, not unkindly. "This section of your lawn is considered shared use frontage. But they're doing it on my lawn. That's my property." He handed her the plat map. "Only up to this line. After that, it's shared. You agreed to that when you bought the house." Karen's face collapsed like a cheapcake. She looked at me, and for a moment, I almost saw a flicker of something behind her fury, confusion, maybe even fear. But just as quickly, it hardened back into rage. "You haven't won," she muttered. "This isn't over." I nodded slowly. "It never is with you." The cops left. The neighbors stayed. We finished the event by laying down a small wooden sign, also legal under the HOA's bylaws, that read, "This lawn sponsored by our caring community." Karen was still watching, trembling, from her kitchen window, when I gave her a thumbs up and went home. That night the retaliation came. At exactly 2:14 a.m., my motion sensor lights snapped on. I looked through the porch cam feed and saw Karen creeping across my driveway, hooded in a dark raincoat like a villain in a soap opera. She knelt near the hedges I'd planted 2 weeks ago and began yanking them up. Roots, soil, everything. I hit record and texted the clip to Hannah, my lawyer. Then I went to bed. By morning, 6 hedges were gone, one was half buried in the grass like a body in a bad crime movie, and my camera had captured every second. When Karen saw me filming her from my porch that morning, she didn't even try to hide it. She flipped me off and slammed her door. No words. Just spite. But I didn't go to the HOA this time. I went to small claims court. Hannah and I filed a vandalism complaint with the footage, the invoice for the destroyed plants, and copies of Karen's earlier citations, all neatly bound. The claim wasn't huge, just under $1,500, but the case itself was solid gold. And more importantly, it forced her into legal territory she couldn't control. In court, no one cared about her status on the HOA or how many Pilates classes she took each week. All they cared about was proof. And I had plenty. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept my head down, tended my now half-ravaged hedges, and quietly prepped for the final phase of the plan, the one I hadn't even hinted at yet. Because here's what Karen didn't know. While she was ripping out plants in the dead of night, I had been negotiating with her husband. Grant was a quiet man. He never said much. He didn't show up to HOA meetings, didn't mow the lawn, didn't even wave back when neighbors greeted him. But he did answer when I emailed him directly with an offer. A business proposal, technically. See, Karen's house had been remortgaged the year before. Public records. Easy to find. And it just so happened that I had a friend in property development who was looking to invest in the area. With the right nudge and the right pressure, Grant could be persuaded to consider early options. I didn't want the whole house. That would have been overkill. I wanted the air rights, specifically the limited-use zoning allowance that Karen had fought against for years, preventing any neighbor from building structures above 15 feet. Grant owned the deed. He just didn't realize what it was worth, until I showed him. I offered him $5,000. Pocket change to most homeowners, but enough for someone feeling cornered and desperate. Especially someone married to Karen. He said yes. 3 days later, I legally owned the right to construct a decorative structure, up to 30 feet tall, on the edge of her eastern property line. And I already knew exactly what I was going to build. Because if Karen thought the Porsche in the pool was the worst thing I could do to her, she had no idea what was coming next. The final play wasn't about blocking her driveway. It was about casting a 30-foot shadow across her precious lawn, every single morning. The permit came through on a Thursday afternoon, tucked in a manila envelope and stamped with the words, "Zoning exception approved." I opened it like a birthday card from the universe. Everything I needed was in that packet: legal diagrams, contractor permissions, setback exemptions. I now had the green light to build what Karen feared more than anything, Something she couldn't control, on land she didn't own, with approval she couldn't revoke. And better yet, I wouldn't even need to explain myself. It was already too late for that. Construction started the following Monday at 7 a.m. sharp. The moment the diesel generator kicked on and the auger began drilling into the dirt along the edge of her side yard, Karen exploded out of her house like a firework wearing a bathrobe. Her hair was a nest of bleach and panic, and her voice cracked mid-scream. "What the hell are you building? You can't build here!" she shrieked, her fists clenched like a toddler denied candy. I was standing next to the contractor, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on. I didn't even flinch. "Morning, Karen. Just putting up a vertical garden trellis. Perfectly within my new zoning rights." "That's my property line," she howled. "Actually," I said, pointing at the freshly painted stake in the ground, "this is the edge of your property. I'm well inside my zone. And as of last week, I also own the air rights above it." Her jaw flapped for a second, trying to form words that wouldn't come. "Air rights? What are you, Elon Musk?" "Nope," I said, "just someone who reads fine print." She stormed off and spent the rest of the morning calling the city zoning office, the HOA board, and, based on the number of angry conversations I overheard, the local news station. None of it helped. The city confirmed the permit. The HOA said it was outside their jurisdiction. And the local news didn't care unless I was setting off fireworks or burying bodies in her lawn. By Wednesday, the vertical structure was halfway done. It was 28 feet tall, built from recycled steel and wood, with long horizontal beams extending toward her yard. A modernist frame for a vertical flower wall, or so the design plans said. But that wasn't its true purpose. I'd already hired a local artist to begin painting the rear panel facing Karen's house, an enormous mural of a serene mountain landscape. Nothing offensive. Nothing crude. Just a huge, impossible-to-ignore reminder of the view she no longer had. See, the way the sun rose in our neighborhood, her bedroom window used to get the golden hour glow every morning. It was the one thing she actually loved about the place. But not anymore. My trellis now blocked that sunrise entirely, casting a 30-foot shadow over her begonias and master suite. From 6:30 to 8:15 a.m., her yard sat in full shade, and I had the time-lapse footage to prove it. Karen tried everything. She called another HOA meeting to vote on sunlight protection ordinances. It failed. She contacted the city planning department to complain about spite architecture. They reviewed the paperwork and shrugged. She even tried to bribe my contractor to stop mid-project. That part was especially fun, because my contractor was also my cousin, and he recorded the entire conversation, including her saying, "Name your price and pretend the concrete was defective." We submitted that recording to the city and HOA just for the laugh. The HOA president, Carl, sent me a one-line email in reply. "I don't get paid enough for this. Fair." The final mural was completed by Saturday. It was stunning. Rolling green peaks, blue skies, hawks soaring. It looked like a window into freedom, painted directly onto a steel monolith. The day it was unveiled, a few neighbors came by just to see it. Some brought lawn chairs. One guy brought popcorn. Karen didn't show her face for 2 days. But it didn't stop there. No, Karen was a cornered animal now, lashing out in every direction. That Monday, I got served with a lawsuit. Officially, it was titled Karen Weaver v. My full name. The allegations were laughable: harassment, emotional damage, malicious property obstruction. She even accused me of intentional landscape sabotage and emotional manipulation via visual pollution. I wasn't sure whether to be insulted or impressed. I sent the whole thing to Hannah. She read it and replied with exactly 3 words: "Let's bury her." Discovery phase started the next week. Hannah filed a countersuit. Not just a defense, but an offensive play, civil harassment, defamation, and repeated nuisance violations. We subpoenaed HOA documents, internal emails, and every violation Karen had ever issued, going back 5 years. Turns out, she had a pattern. She'd used her position to find people she didn't like, approve plans for friends, and block permits out of personal spite. Carl, under pressure and wanting no part of it, folded immediately. He turned over everything. Meeting note, emails, even a memo from 3 months ago where Karen proposed fining me for grass that looks smug. No, I'm not kidding. That was the exact phrasing. The court date was set. In the meantime, Karen's life began unraveling. Her husband Grant stopped coming home on time. Her kids, both teenagers, started spending weekends at friends' houses. The Porsche was still in the pool, by the way. Insurance hadn't paid out, because technically, there was no accident, just unauthorized repositioning. It sat there like a cautionary tale, slowly rusting in chlorinated silence. But the final straw wasn't something I did. It was something Karen did to herself. See, she thought she still had allies. People she'd manipulated for years. So she tried to rally them, pressuring them to testify against me, claiming I was stalking her or turning the neighborhood against her. But the tide had shifted. Too many people had been burned by her petty rules, her fake citations, her threats of fines. One by one, her allies flipped. Some gave written statements to my lawyer. Others just cut ties. The worst betrayal, at least for her, came from Grant. 1 week before the court hearing, Grant moved out. I found out because he knocked on my door one evening with 2 duffel bags and a sheepish look. "Hey," he said. "Mind if I crash in your guest room for a couple days?" I blinked. "You serious?" "She tried to put a GPS tracker on my phone," he said. "Claimed you were brainwashing me." "I'm done." I let him in. We didn't talk about it much. I didn't need to. The man just wanted quiet. A place without yelling. Without lawn wars. Without porch cameras capturing every meltdown in 4K. Court was quick. Karen showed up in a navy blazer 2 sizes too tight and heels she clearly couldn't walk in. Her lawyer looked like he regretted everything about his life choices. Our side was calm. Hannah presented the footage, the emails, the recordings, the plat maps, the air rights transfer. She even had an animation showing the sunrise shifting behind my mural and how it was technically still legal. The judge dismissed her lawsuit with prejudice, then turned and asked Karen's lawyer why he hadn't advised her against filing in the first place. Karen cried. Not big sobs. Quiet, tight tears. Rage and embarrassment mixed into a single, broken expression. We didn't cheer. We didn't celebrate. We just walked out quietly. But as I stepped outside into the warm sun, past the courthouse steps, a young reporter with a camera crew stopped me. "Sir," she said, "is it true you forklift a Porsche into a pool?" I smiled. "You'd have to ask the HOA." Then I kept walking. In the weeks following the court victory, Karen went uncharacteristically silent. No new violation notices, no HOA memos about trash cans or bird feeders, no midnight calls to zoning enforcement. It was as if the puppet strings of her petty empire had been severed, and now she didn't know what to do with her hands. The mural on my 30-foot trellis still loomed over her yard, casting a long shadow each morning and attracting a steady trickle of curious passers-by. Some of them took photos. A few asked if it was part of an art installation. One woman from 2 blocks over actually brought her book club to see it and left a potted succulent as a thank you. I placed it on the base of the structure, right where the light hit best, as a quiet little middle finger to the woman across the street. Karen's Porsche was finally removed, though not by her. The insurance company, having lost patience with her, pending documentation, sent in a contractor with a crane and a hazmat crew. It took half a day, and when they finally winched the rust-streaked husk of a once luxury vehicle out of the pool, it dripped like a drowned ego. The pool itself was declared chemically unsalvageable. Too much transmission fluid, brake dust, and mildew for even the most aggressive cleaning agents to fix. I watched from my porch as they drained it into a waiting tanker. Karen stayed inside the whole time, blinds drawn, her kingdom crumbling 1 chlorinated gallon at a time. Meanwhile, I kept winning quietly. My backyard renovation, which had been on hold due to all the drama, resumed. I installed a new deck, a cedar pergola, and even added a koi pond, just to flex a little. I didn't need the fish. I just liked knowing that while Karen was scrubbing mildew from her empty pool, I was hand-feeding koi beneath bamboo wind chimes. Every time she walked past my house on the way to her mailbox, she had to hear the soft bubbling of my garden stream. I kept it running extra loud in the mornings. Then came the final blow. The HOA election. Technically, Karen's suspension from the board was temporary, pending an internal review, which the HOA bylaws required within 90 days. But no one initiated that review. Carl had conveniently forgotten, and the other members weren't in a hurry to remind him. That left one open board seat, and I, being a dues-paying homeowner in good standing with an immaculate yard and 0 violations, was eligible to run. Karen, despite her fall from grace, tried to rally support against me. I heard whispers around the neighborhood, claims that I was dangerous, that I'd weaponized the HOA, that I was some kind of suburban vigilante with a grudge and a forklift. She even made flyers, actual flyers, printed on pink cardstock and distributed door to door. One of them said, "Don't let the neighborhood turn into a dictatorship of sarcasm." I took that as a compliment. When election night arrived, we gathered in the community center, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights and a smell somewhere between old coffee and dry erase markers. The turnout was the largest in HOA history. People brought lawn chairs. Someone brought popcorn again. Karen sat stiffly near the back, glaring at me like a disgraced prom queen watching someone else get crowned. Carl stood at the front and cleared his throat. After tallying the votes, it looks like our new board member is unanimously selected. He didn't even say my name. He didn't have to. Half the room turned to me and clapped. The other half just sighed with relief that Karen hadn't won anything. She didn't stay for the end of the meeting. She walked out halfway through, arms stiff at her sides, heels clicking like a warning signal. I caught up with her on the sidewalk outside. "Karen," I said, calm as ever. She turned around, eyes blazing, lips trembling. "Do you enjoy this?" I tilted my head. "Define this." "You've ruined my life," she snapped. "My family's falling apart. I can't walk outside without someone staring at me. You made me a joke." I paused. The air between us felt heavy, but I didn't rush to fill it. "I didn't make you a joke," I said finally. "I just stopped letting you be the punchline writer." She stared at me for a moment longer, then shook her head. "You're a monster." "Maybe," I replied. "But monsters don't typically follow zoning ordinances and file paperwork." She walked away without another word. The next morning, her house was listed on Zillow. Within 2 weeks, a for sale sign sprouted from her front lawn like poetic justice in aluminum. The listing was clinical and desperate. Beautiful stucco 2-story with pool, upgraded kitchen, motivated seller. It left out the mural view, the easement dispute history, and the neighborhood infamy. A young couple bought it. Newlyweds. Sweet people. They asked if they could keep the community garden plot on the easement. I said yes, and even offered to help replant it. They brought cookies. No HOA complaints. No citations. No screaming matches at 2 a.m. Karen didn't leave with a bang. No moving trucks, no farewell party. She was gone one morning before sunrise, like a defeated general retreating before the enemy could cheer. Her house sat empty for 3 days before the new couple moved in. I didn't miss her. Nobody did. But just to be safe, I kept the trellis up. Not out of spite. Out of principle. It was a monument. Not to revenge, but to patience. A 30-foot-tall, steel-framed lesson in why you don't pick a war with someone who has blueprints, permits, and unlimited access to forklift. Months passed. Life got quieter. The neighborhood was friendlier. The HOA meetings got shorter. I was re-elected to the board with a 94% approval rating. Carl stepped down and moved to Arizona. I became president by default. One Saturday afternoon, while sipping coffee on my porch, I saw Grant walking down the sidewalk with his daughter. He'd stayed in town. Moved into a condo nearby. We nodded to each other. Not friends. Not enemies. Just two men who had somehow survived a suburban Cold War. The koi pond gurgled beside me. A butterfly landed on the trellis. And for the first time in a long while, everything was still. That's the thing about living in a neighborhood run by entitled people. Eventually, you either break, or you build something taller than their egos. And if you're smart, you paint a mountain on it, so they know exactly what they'll never climb again.